영어 동화 세상 리틀팍스.
Monster Academy, The Mystery of the Crashing Brooms. Chapter 1, The First Day. It was Ben's first day of school at Monster Academy. He floated into the auditorium for the first day assembly. Inside, he saw some other ghosts, along with a crowd of goblins, zombies, and other monsters. Everyone was talking loudly. "Ben, over here!" Ben easily spotted the giant who was waving to him. Ben shot over to her.
"I'm glad you're here, Gabby,"
said Ben as he sat down next to her.
"You're the only one I know and—"
Crash! Ben stopped talking. So did all the other monsters around him. A two-headed monster looked up at the ceiling.
"What made that sound?"
asked one of her heads.
"I don't know,"
answered her other head.
It sounded like a giant landed on the roof of the school,
said a goblin. "Maybe it's my mom," Gabby whispered to Ben with a giggle. Ben grinned. Gabby's mom was a giant, just like Gabby. But Ben was pretty sure she wasn't on the roof of the school. Mr. Freaky, the school principal, rushed onto the stage. He was tall and thin, and he had 3 noses.
Monsters, please be seated. Everything is totally under control.
Mr. Freaky loves to say that everything is under control, Gabby whispered. But what he really means is that everything is totally out of control. Ben laughed. It was lucky that his family had moved next door to Gabby over the summer. Gabby had told Ben nearly everything he needed to know about Monster Academy. All the students and teachers are monsters, just like us, she had explained. The principal is pretty nice, as long as you don't get in trouble. The office ogre is friendly too, unless she gets really busy. After all, she only has 4 arms. Ben looked around the crowded auditorium again. Most of the students were still talking. A few ghosts in the last row were batting around a ball of paper. Mr. Freaky clapped his hands for silence.
Please don't worry about the loud crash. I'm sure it was just another broom.
A murmur went through the crowd.
"What is Mr. Freaky talking about?"
asked a troll.
We've had a few incidents involving flying brooms this morning.
Mr. Freaky went on.
But let's forget about that for now. Your 8th grade class president, Waldo Wiz, would like to say a few words.
Monsters whistled and shouted as a young wizard approached the microphone. Gabby's eyes lit up. "Waldo's amazing," she gushed. "He's so cute! Plus he's super smart, and he can do all kinds of magic." Waldo waved to the crowd.
This is going to be a fabulous school year,
he began.
We have 2 new after-school clubs. Marching band and spellcasting. And the first dance is coming up soon. The Monster Mash dance will be held in a few weeks, so don't forget to show your best school spirit and participate in all our great activities.
The crowd cheered again. Waldo handed the microphone to Mr. Freaky.
Settle down, students,
said Mr. Freaky.
Before you go to class, I have some news about People Place. There's a new mayor.
People Place is creepy.
Murmured a skeleton. In the next row, a four-eyed monster leaned toward a three-eyed monster.
I heard the new mayor is really scary looking. He only has 2 eyes.
Ew, gross!
Replied the three-eyed monster. Ben knew that Monsterville was next to a town inhabited by people. A huge wooden fence separated the two towns. His parents had warned him and his brother Sid to stay away from that fence. But he didn't know anything about the mayor. Mr. Freaky was still talking.
I've been told that Mayor Hubbletree doesn't like monsters, so we must be extra careful not to upset him. Remember, Monster Academy was built on land owned by People Place. If we scare the people, they could force us to leave our school.
The two-headed monster raised her hand.
I was near People Place last week.
Said one head.
A human kid saw me and screamed. I wasn't even doing anything.
Said the other head. Mr. Freaky nodded.
Unfortunately, some people get scared just looking at monsters. Now please exit quietly, monsters, and enjoy your first day of school. It's going to be a wonderful school year.
Ben and Gabby exchanged looks.
And everything is totally under total control.
They said at the same time, laughing. They headed out of the auditorium. Ben thought it was fun to kid around with Gabby, and so far, Monster Academy seemed really cool. But he had to admit that a few things were worrying him. The principal seemed nervous, and empty brooms were crashing around the school. Plus, People Place had a new mayor, one who didn't like monsters. Monster Academy, The Mystery of the Crashing Brooms. Chapter 2, Mrs. Hag. Ben paused in the hallway to check his class schedule. His first class was cooking in room 103.
Cooking class?
Thought Ben.
I don't want to learn to cook.
Around him, lockers slammed and feet thudded as other monsters hurried to their classes.
How does my eye makeup look?
Ben heard a purple monster ask a goblin.
My mom says I put way too much on.
It looks great,
Answered the goblin.
but you missed your fourth eye completely.
Ben sighed and floated down the hall and into room 103. He saw a zombie sitting alone at a table.
Hi.
Said Ben.
Can I sit here?
The zombie stared silently at Ben. Ben felt uncomfortable.
Maybe he doesn't like me.
He thought. There hadn't been any zombies at his old school, mostly just other ghosts. A witch sat down at the table. Ben recognized her from his homeroom. She had flowing black hair and was dressed all in black. Even her fingernails were painted black. The witch smiled at Ben.
Zombies just like to stare. It doesn't mean he doesn't like you.
What?
Ben thought, startled.
How did she know what I was thinking?
The witch laughed.
I can't always tell what others are thinking, but sometimes I can. Have a seat.
Uh-oh.
Ben thought, sitting down. He was going to have to watch his thoughts when this witch was around. Ben sneaked another look at the witch. Her eyes were green and flecked with gold. She was the most beautiful witch he'd ever seen. Just then, a huge monster with 2 sharp horns stalked over to the table.
Move over!
He growled at Ben.
I sit next to Winnie!
Chill out, Mog.
Said the witch, spreading her fingers to admire her nail polish. Mog ignored her. He moved his face so close to Ben's that their noses nearly touched.
Did you hear me?
Said Mog.
I said move over!
The room was suddenly quiet. All the other monsters were looking at Ben. Ben puffed out his chest, trying not to look scared.
I heard you,
He said.
but I'm not moving.
He glanced at Winnie, who was watching him with a surprised look. Mog glared at Ben for a few moments. Finally, the big monster grunted and sat down on the other side of Winnie, at the end of the table. To Ben's surprise, a ghoul sitting at the next table gave Ben the claws up sign. A moment later, an old witch hobbled into the room. She wore a crooked purple hat and orange sunglasses. On her chin was a huge mole.
She used to be the broom flying teacher.
Winnie whispered.
My sister had her last year. She was terrible at flying brooms, though. So now a new teacher, Miss Bungle, teaches it.
Good morning, monsters,
Said the teacher.
My name is Mrs. Hag, and I will be your cooking teacher.
Mog groaned.
Excuse me,
Said Mrs. Hag, fixing her eyes on Mog.
did you have something to say?
Yeah!
Said Mog.
I hate cooking!
We actually have something in common.
Thought Ben. Mrs. Hag grinned, revealing a row of brown, rotted teeth.
Well then, Mog, perhaps you'll prefer cleaning. That will be your job at the end of class.
Mog scowled, and Ben tried not to laugh. After Mrs. Hag took attendance, she opened an enormous cookbook.
For our first cooking lesson, we will make slimy toad stew.
Yum.
Said the ghoul, smacking his lips.
First, we need to gather the ingredients.
Mrs. Hag read from the cookbook.
Let's see. 6 rotten eggs, 4 dried worms, 1 ounce of bat claws. Oh, I just bought some bat claws yesterday.
She felt in her pocket.
I thought I had them with me.
Mrs. Hag searched her other pockets, but she couldn't find the bat claws anywhere.
Oh well, I must have dropped them somewhere.
She muttered to herself. Mrs. Hag opened a cabinet and peeked inside.
What else can we use? Aha! These thorns will probably work just as well as bat claws.
The teacher pulled a small bag from the cabinet.
It says here that these are very special thorns,
Said Mrs. Hag as she examined the bag.
They're from a bush that was grown by the light of the full moon.
I'm not sure she knows what she's doing.
Winnie murmured. By now, some of the monsters in class were starting to doze off. Ben thought he heard the zombie snoring, but the zombie's eyes were still open. Ben looked at Winnie. Winnie shrugged.
I don't know either. He might be sleeping or he might be awake. It's hard to tell with zombies.
Ben was about to respond when suddenly his stool flew out from under him and across the room. Monster Academy, The Mystery of the Crashing Brooms. Chapter 3, One Mean Monster. Ben looked at his stool in surprise. It was halfway across the room. Ben, however, was floating exactly where he'd been. Mog lay sprawled on the floor.
He tried to knock me over.
Ben realized.
Mog!
Cried Mrs. Hag.
What are you doing?
The monster got up off the floor.
I was, trying to get my stool back.
He pointed to the stool he had knocked across the room.
That's not your stool,
said Mrs. Hag.
That's Ben's stool. Now sit down and behave yourself.
Mog sat down as Ben got the stool. When Ben came back, Mog leaned over the table, scowling at him.
Listen, you pathetic excuse for a monster.
Mog whispered.
Stay away from Winnie, or you'll end up all alone, haunting a ghost town.
Oh, Mog,
said Winnie.
He wouldn't be alone in a ghost town. Those places are filled with ghosts.
She flashed a smile at Ben. Snarled Mog, still glaring at Ben.
He's a really nice guy,
Winnie whispered to Ben.
He's just not showing it today.
Mrs. Hag clapped her hands.
Let's start cooking. Mog, get out the soap and scrub brush so you're ready to clean up when we're done.
Ben watched Mog get up. Ben had stood up to Mog earlier, but he was new at school and he couldn't afford to make enemies. He'd better stay out of Mog's way for now. Then he stole another quick look at Winnie, hoping she hadn't read his thoughts again. Maybe he'd better stay out of her way, too. At lunch, Gabby told Ben more about the dance that Waldo had mentioned. And over the next few days, that's all anyone was talking about at Monster Academy. Who was going with whom to the Monster Mash dance? Which girl monsters had asked boy monsters? Why did the girl mummies always spend the evening giggling and running to the restroom to rewrap their bandages? Ben wanted to go to the dance. He had already met a bunch of girl monsters at Monster Academy, but there was only one he really liked, and she was taken. A few days later, during homeroom, Mr. Freaky made an announcement.
Attention, monsters!
His voice crackled over the loudspeaker.
As you know, we've been having some strange problems with our brooms since school started. We've found brooms everywhere. The restrooms, the gym, the soccer field. Just yesterday, one crashed through my office window. We're not sure who's causing the empty brooms to fly around, but we will find the monster responsible. In the meantime, because of the danger, we're canceling all extracurricular activities. That includes the Monster Mash dance.
What?
That's not fair.
Everyone in Ben's homeroom started complaining.
Furthermore,
continued Mr. Freaky,
all broom flying classes will be suspended until the broom incident stops.
No broom flying class?
Shrieked a witch sitting next to Winnie.
That stinks! You're not kidding.
Winnie looked like she might cry.
My parents promised to get me my own broom as soon as I got my broom flying license.
She sighed.
I'll be an ugly old witch before I can fly a broom by myself.
You could never be an ugly old witch,
thought Ben as he gazed over at Winnie. Winnie suddenly looked up, and her green eyes stared right into his. Ben looked away quickly. The bell rang, and all the students headed off to class. As Ben drifted down the hallway, he thought about the sad look on Winnie's face again. Poor Winnie, she looked so disappointed. Suddenly, Ben got a brilliant idea.
I'll figure out who's crashing the brooms.
he thought.
Then Winnie can go back to broom flying class and get her own broom.
He was new at Monster Academy, but he could find the mysterious broom flyer and help Winnie. He knew he could. Later, Ben heard a voice behind him in the cafeteria. It was Gabby. He turned to look up at her.
Guess what?
She cried, jumping up and down. The entire cafeteria shook,
Hey, quit jumping!
complained a goblin at the next table.
You spilled my toad juice!
What is it? Tell me.
Said Ben. Gabby stopped jumping.
Waldo Wiz asked me to go see a movie on Friday night!
She said.
That's fantastic.
Said Ben.
Waldo is so nice.
Gabby gushed.
He's cute too. Have I told you about how great he is at magic?
Yes.
Ben rolled his eyes. Gabby had told him about Waldo Wiz's magic skills, along with his bright blue eyes, many, many times. Ben was about to remind Gabby of this when another idea came to him. Waldo was supposed to be some kind of genius at magic. Maybe he could help find the monster who was crashing all the brooms.